Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Gaiety Theatre and this evening's performance of Mark Twain. Can I just ask that you all please put your mobile phones either off or on silent for the duration of the performance. Inside your little free programmes you'll find an evaluation form. If you could take a few minutes at the end to fill that in and put it in the box over on the table here, that would be greatly appreciated. The show is approximately 45 minutes and then interval and then another 45 minutes. The bar will remain open downstairs if you want to go down and get some refreshments to bring back up or just want to go out for some fresh air on this hot day. But enjoy the show.
Samuel Langhorne Clemens, born 1835 in the almost invisible town of Florida, Missouri. 2 weeks after Halley's Comet shone its brightest in the night sky. I'm proud to have done more than most men in history have ever done for any town. I increased its population by 1%. Now, if you were born in my state, and you pronounce it Missouri. If you were not born in my state, you pronounce it Missouri. If you were born in my state and lived your whole life in my state, you pronounce it misery. Now, you may know me by my chosen nom de plume, Mark Twain. I will explain the origins of this pen name, but you will have to be patient. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for coming along this evening to listen to my meanderings, and I truly hope you'll find something of use amongst them, either by way of improving yourself or by impressing others through repetition of my genius. I was born modest, but it wore off. And quite after death, how many people will be attending this evening, broken down by sex? They said none, they all seem to be thriving on it. I was also told I could not smoke on stage this evening. It is verboten. I've been smoking cigars since I was 8 years old. But tonight I'm required to take a short hiatus. I will, however, continue to hold my cigar, for it is my muse, my comfort, my constant companion. I have heard on good authority that my soul had passed on into the great yonder. Hallelujah. Reports of my death were exaggerated. And I'm delighted to be able to share some stories with you this evening from my life. Some amusing, others fascinating, a few quite tragic, and some are even true. One of the tragedies which haunts me daily is the death of my younger brother, Henry, for I hold myself responsible for this travesty. I will return to this. Now, it is true that while I was in London recently, I had taken rather ill. My constitution succumbed to a severe cold, getting ready to do something. But the preparation was too much like exercise to my mind. Exercise is overrated. It is loathsome. I've never taken any exercise except when sleeping and resting. and I do not intend to take any. I do not see the attraction in being tired. I'm pushing 65. That is enough exercise for me. I asked a reliable friend how to rid myself of this affliction. He advised drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. I sought a second opinion. He advised the same. That makes half a gallon. I was determined to complete the course or perish in the attempt. It was a journalist who began the rumors of my untimely death. So I told this journalist, it is better to keep your mouth shut and appear stupid than to open it and remove all doubt. I traveled here by railroad. It was one of those trains that gets tired and has to stop every 7 minutes for 3/4 of an hour. I was in the company of a gentleman who had with him a remarkable looking dog, which barked steadily at nothing. Ruff! 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 Until it died. It was a very long, low dog. Very short, strange-looking legs, curved inwards, like parentheses turned the wrong way. I think, it seems to me that this dog would have been a stronger and more practicable dog if it had more legs. I did not like to ask what kind it was or how it came to be deformed. For it was plain that the man was very fond of his dog and could naturally be very sensitive about it. The gentleman was proud of his dog, much the same way a mother feels about her child, even though it is an idiot. From what he told me, I think he was going to hunt elephants with him. I think if he tries to hunt elephants with it, he's going to be severely disappointed. It is not suited for elephant hunting. It lacks energy, it lacks force of character, it lacks bitterness. It would not attack an elephant, I'm sure of it. I think if this dog were to see an elephant approaching, I think it would just sit down and pray. This is one of the few situations I could think of where an animal would do such a thing. Otherwise, it would have no reason. Man, however, prays for everything and anything. We pray to our God in heaven. Heaven is by favor. If it were by merit, your dog would go in, you would stay out. The dog is a gentleman. I hope to go to his heaven, not man's. If I cannot drink bourbon in heaven, I won't stay long. If I cannot smoke cigars in heaven, I will go the other way. The only reason to go to heaven is the climate. Hell for the company. I make one rule about smoking. Never smoke when asleep, never refrain when awake. Giving up is easy. I've done it thousands of times. Man is the only religious animal. He is the only animal with the true religion. Several of them. Often it does seem a pity that Noah and his party did not miss the boat. Now I have been studying the traits and dispositions of the so-called lower animals and contrasting them with the traits and dispositions of man. And I found the results humiliating, for It obliges me to renounce my allegiance to the Darwinian theory of the ascent of man from the lower animals, for it seems plain to me that this theory ought to be vacated in favor of a new and truer one. A new and truer one to be named the descent of man from the higher animals. Man is the reasoning animal, such is the claim. I think it is open to dispute. And I've experimented in such. My experiments have shown that he is the unreasoning animal. One of my experiments was this. I caught a cat and a dog. In an hour, I taught them to be friends. I put them in a cage. In another hour, I taught them to be friends with a rabbit. Over the course of 2 days, I was able to add a fox, a goose, a squirrel, some doves, and finally a monkey. They lived together in peace, even affectionately. Next, in another cage, I confined an Irish Catholic from Tipperary. And once he seemed tame, I was able to add a Scotch Presbyterian from Aberdeen, a Turk from Constantinople, a Greek Christian from Crete, an Armenian, a Methodist from the wilds of Arkansas, a Buddhist from China, a Brahmin from Benares, and finally a Salvation Army colonel from Wapping. I stayed away for 2 whole days. And I came back to note the results. The cage of the higher animals was fine and dandy. The other one was all cattywampus. It was a chaos of gory alternands of turbans and fezzies and plaids and bones and flesh, not a specimen left alive. These reasoning animals had disagreed on a theological detail and carried the matter to a higher court. I think our Heavenly Father created man because he was disappointed in the monkey. Now, my mother was a strict Calvinist. And by the time I was 15, she had compelled me to read the entire Bible. The Bible is full of interest. It has some noble poetry and some clever fables and some blood-drenched history and upwards of 1,000 lies. It ain't the parts of the Bible I can't understand that bother me, it's the parts I do understand. Now, when I was young, I could remember anything, whether it happened or not. One memory that stays with me is happened when I was 14 years old. My sister, every autumn, she threw a party for all the marriageable young people in the village. And I was too young for this society, so I was not invited, at least not for the whole evening. 10 minutes was to be my share. I was to play the part of a bear in a small fairy play, and I was to be disguised all over in close-fitting brown hairy stuff, proper for a bear. At 10:30, I was told to go to my room and put on this disguise and come down in half an hour. I started out, but I changed my mind. I wanted to practice a little, and that room was very small. So I snuck out. I went across the street to a large, unoccupied house on the corner, and not knowing that a dozen other young people were also going to be there to get dressed or perhaps rehearse for their parts, I took the little black slave boy, Sandy, with me, and we chose an empty and roomy chamber on the 2nd floor. We entered the room talking, and this gave opportunity for a couple of half-dressed young ladies to take refuge behind the screen. undiscovered. Their gowns and things were hanging on hooks on the back of the door, but I didn't notice them, for it was Sandy who closed the door. But his heart was all in the theatricals, as mine was, and he was as unlikely to notice them as I was myself. So, it was an old and rickety screen with many holes in it, but since I did not know there were a couple of girls behind it, I was undisturbed by this detail. If I had known, I would not have undressed in the flood of cruel moonlight that came pouring in at the curtainless window. I would have died of shame. So, I began my practice. I stripped to the skin, and I begun. I was full of ambition. I was determined to make a hit. I was burning to establish my reputation as a bear. Perhaps get other engagements. So, I threw myself into my work with abandon that promised great things. I capered back and forth from one end of the room to the other, and on fours, Sandy applauding with enthusiasm. I stood upright, I growled, I snapped, I snarled, and I flung handsprings, I stood on my head. I did a lubberless dance with my paws bent inwards and my imaginary snout sniffing from side to side. I did many things that a bear could do, and many things no bear could ever do. And no bear with any dignity would want to do anyway. And all this time I didn't think I was making a spectacle of myself to anyone but Sandy. In my head. Standing in my head. I paused in that attitude to take a minute's rest. And then Sandy spoke up with excited enthusiasm out of nowhere. "Master Sam, you ever heard of a smoked heron?" I said, "No. What is that?" He said, "It's a fish." I inquired further, still standing on my head. "So what? Anything peculiar about it?" "Yes, sir, you bet there is. They eat them, guts and all." A smothered burst of feminine snickers came from behind the screen, and all my strength went out of me, and I tumbled down like an undermined tower, bringing the screen down with my weight, burying the young ladies under it. In the fright, they gave out a couple of piercing screams, perhaps others I did not wait to count. I snatched my clothes, fled to the dark hall below. Sandy followed after me, and I was dressed in half a minute and out the back way. I swore Sandy to eternal silence, and we went and hid until the party was over. I could not bear that giddy company after my adventure. I knew there would be two performers there who knew my secret and would be privately laughing at me all the time. I was searched for but not found. The part of a bear had to be played by a young gentleman in civilized clothes. When I finally ventured home, very heavy-hearted, full of a sense of disgrace, pinned to my pillow was a slip of paper which did not lighten my heart but only made my face burn. It was written in a laboriously disguised hand, and these were its mocking terms. "You probably could not have played bear, but you played bear very well." Oh, very, very well. Oh, I suffered miserably after that episode. And I thought that the next morning the facts would be all over the village, but it was not so. The secret remained confined to the two girls and Sandy and me. When I left the village 4 years later, the secret was still a secret. I never did guess those girls out, and was no longer expecting to, nor wanting to either. One of the dearest and prettiest girls in the village at the time of my mishap was one whom we shall call Mary Wilson for that was not her name. Ah, she was dainty and sweet, peach bloomy and exquisite, gracious and lovely in character, and I was in awe of her. For she seemed to me to be made out of angel clay, and was quite rightly unapproachable by an unholy, ordinary kind of boy like me. I probably never suspected her. But, not so long ago, on one of my lecturing tours, I arrived in Calcutta. And as I entered the hotel, a divine vision passed out. And Mary Wilson of my long-vanished boyhood, clothed in the glory of the Indian sunshine. It was a startling thing. Before I could recover from my bewildering shock and speak to her, she was gone. I thought at first it might have been an apparition, but she was flesh. She was the granddaughter of the other Mary, the original Mary. That Mary, now widowed, was upstairs and presently sent for me. She was old and gray-haired, but she looked young and was very handsome. We sat down and talked. We steeped our thirsty souls in the reviving wine of the past, the beautiful past, the dear, lamented past. We uttered names that had been silent on our lips for more than 50 years. And it was as though they were made of music. With reverent hands we unburied our dead, the mates of our youth, and caressed them with our speech. We searched the dusty chambers of our memory and dragged forth incident after incident, episode after episode, folly after folly, laughed such good laughs with tears running down, and then suddenly Mary said, with no leading up, "Tell me, what is a special peculiarity of smoked herring?" I thought it was a strange question at such a hallowed time as this, and a little bit inconsequential too. I was a little shocked, but at the same time I was aware of a stirring somewhere down in the deeps of my memory. It got me searching, thinking, wondering. Peculiar, smoked herring, peculiarity of smoke. I looked up. Her face was grave, and there was a dim, shadowy twinkle in her eye. And somewhere down in the hoary past, a remembered voice murmured, "They eat some guts and all." And all at once I knew. I said, "At last, I found one of you." Who was the other girl? But she would not tell me. She drew the line there. One of my childhood dreams, along with every boy I knew, was to be a riverboat pilot on the majestic and magnificent Mississippi, a steamboat. Now, as promised, I'd like to clear up one thing about the pen name with which I become celebrated. The most obvious theory is that of the Mississippi Riverboat Call. When the level of the boat reaches the second mark, showing that the water is 2 fathoms deep and safe for the boat, the leadsman would call out, "Mark Twain." Now store that for a moment. I will return to this particular notion. Another theory which has reached my ears is that of my alleged habit of ordering 2 shots of whiskey at the same time, as if, and asking the barman to mark Twain next to my tab. Apparently this habit became so frequent that the phrase became my nickname. I read this in a newspaper of some disrepute, And I wrote away a letter in my defense, explaining that Mark Twain was in fact the nom de plume of one Captain Isaiah Sellers, who wrote reports on the river news for the local newspaper. He died in 1863. And wasn't no longer in need of that signature, so I laid my violent hands on it without asking permission of the owner's remains. So it is true that the Mississippi boat call did chime with me, but I was not the first. My dream by night, my longing by day had never been realized, but it came to pass. When I was 21 years old, I met pilot Horace Bixby as I took passage on the steamboat Paul Jones. And my boyhood dream to become a steamboatman had been revived. I convinced Bixby to take me on as a culver pilot. And I began to learn the river. Now, the figure I over my 2 years apprenticeship, I served under many pilots. And the figure that comes to mind oftenest out of the shadows of that vanished time is that of William Brown. He was a middle-aged, bony, long, slim, horse-faced, smooth-shaven, ignorant, malicious, stingy, fault-finding, moat-magnifying tyrant. I only got into the habit of coming on watch with dread in my heart. I remember the first time I came into the presence of that man. He was at the wheel. And I was in the middle of the room, fixed to make my bow. But Brown never turned around. I thought he might have given a furtive glance out the corner of his eye, but since not even that notice was repeated, I judged I must have been mistaken. It would be improper to interrupt him, so I stepped softly onto the high bench and took a seat. When my new boss turned around, he inspected me from head to heel, painstakingly and deliberately. "Are you Horace Bixby's cub?" "Yes, sir." "What's your name?" I told him. "Where was you born?" "Florida, Missouri." "Darn sight better stay there." "How long you been on the river?" I told him. Another inspection, and then, "Where'd you get them shoes?" I gave him information. "Hold up your foot." He scratched his head thoughtfully for a moment and then said, "Well, I'll be darned," and then returned to the wheel. What occasion there was to be darned about it is as much a mystery to me today as it was back then. When that long horse face swung around on me again, what a change! The face was as red as fire and every muscle in it was working. And then came the shriek, "Are you going to sit there all day?" I lit to the middle of the room, shot there by the electric suddenness of the surprise, and once I could find my voice, I said, "I have no orders, sir." "Oh, what a mighty fine bird we are. We have no orders. Our father was a gentleman and owned slaves, and we've been to school, and we are gentlemen too. We must have orders. Orders is it? What is this what you want? Darn my skin! I swear to learn you to swell yourself up and blow up a rat, but you get away from the wheel!" I'd approached it without knowing, and I stepped back a couple of steps. Stood as if in a dream, all my senses stupefied by this frantic assault. Often when I went to bed, I killed Brown in many different ways. Each one of them new. Now, the tragedy which I mentioned earlier was on its way to me. My younger brother Henry, for whom I managed to get an unpaid post, appeared on the hurricane deck. He had been given orders by the captain. and he shouted up to Brown to stop at some landing or other about a mile or so below. But I doubted whether Brown, he never gave any intimation of whether he had heard anything. But that was his way. The wind was blowing. He was deaf. I doubted very much whether he had heard the order. Now, if I had two heads, I would have said something, but since I only had one, it seemed judicious to take care of it. So I kept still. Sure enough, we went sailing by that plantation, and Captain Kleinfelter appeared on the hurricane deck and shouted up, "Let her come round, sir! Let her come round! Didn't Henry tell you to stop here?" "No, sir. I sent him up to do it. He came up, sir, that's all. God darn good it did. The fool didn't say anything." "Didn't you hear him?" he said to me. I didn't want to be mixed up in this business, so I said, "Yes, sir." I knew what Brown's next remark was going to be before he uttered it. "Shut your mouth! You never heard anything of the kind." I closed my mouth according to instructions. Now, an hour later, Henry came into the pilot house, totally unaware with what was going on. I was sorry to see him come in. He was a wholly inoffensive boy, and I knew that Brown wouldn't have no pity on him, and he started straight away. "Here, why didn't you tell me to stop at that plantation?" "I did tell you, sir," Henry said. "It's a lie." And I said, "You lie yourself." "He did tell you." Brown looked at me with unaffected surprise. And for as much as a whole moment, he was entirely speechless. And then he said to me, "I'll deal with your case in half a minute." And to Henry, "You, out of the pilot house, go on, get out with you." Henry started out, and Brown, with a sudden excess of fury, picked up a 10-pound lump of coal and sprang after him. But I was in between with a heavy stool, and I gave him a good honest blow and stretched him out. I'd committed the crime of crimes. I'd lifted my hand against a pilot on duty. I pounded him with my fist for a considerable amount of time. I don't know how long, but the pleasure of it probably made it seem longer than it was. But he eventually sprang free and sprang to the wheel, a very natural solicitude, because all this time the boat was tearing down the river with no one at the helm. Perceiving at a glance that the Pennsylvania was in no danger, he picked up the big spyglass, war club fashion, and ordered me out of the pilot house. But I was not afraid of him anymore. So I stayed and criticized his grammar. The whole scene put Brown in a whirlwind of confusion, and everybody, the racket had brought everybody onto the hurricane deck, and I trembled when I saw the captain look up from the midst of it. And I thought, I am done for now. For although he could be very forgiving and indulgent to the boat's family, and could be very patient with minor shortcomings, he could be severe when the fault was worth it. I dropped my head, and he stood before me for a while, and then said impressively, "Follow me." I dropped into his wake, and he led me to his parlor. We were alone now. I stood in front of him, and he sat down. "So, you've been fighting Mr. Brown?" I answered meekly, "Yes, sir." "Mm-hmm. Do you know that this is a very serious matter?" "Yes, sir." "Are you aware this boat was plowing down the river a full 5 minutes with no one at the wheel?" "Yes, sir." "Did you strike him first?" "Yes, sir." "What with?" "A stool, sir." "Hard? That is, severely?" "Maybe, sir." "Did you knock him down?" "Well, he fell, sir." "Mm-hmm. Did you follow it up? That is, did you do anything else?" Yes, sir. What did you do? I pounded him, sir. Pounded him! Yes, sir. Much. That is, severely. You might call it that, sir, maybe. I'm deuced glad to hear it. Harkee, never mention I said that. Now, you have been guilty of a great crime. Do not be guilty of it on this boat again. But lay for him ashore. Give him a good sound thrashing, do you hear? I'll pay the expenses. Now go on, clear out with you. You've been guilty of a great crime, you whelp. I slid out happy at the sense of a close shave and a mighty deliverance. And I heard him laugh to himself and slap his fat thigh as I closed his door. When Brown demanded that I be put ashore in New Orleans, I parted ways with the Pennsylvania. Henry stayed aboard. I gave him some advice. In case of disaster to the boat, do not lose your head. Leave that unwisdom to the passengers. However, on June the 13th, my advice was not pertinent to the matter at hand. The boiler on the Pennsylvania exploded and took with it over 200 lives, including that of Mr. Brown and my brother Henry, who survived for a few days afterwards, but was so badly scalded he was not with us long. It is a great sadness that Henry never saw me fulfill my boyhood dream, becoming a steamboat pilot. And I will regret the tragedy of his death to my last breath. I will never forgive myself for not taking him with me. The time drifted on, and I thought and even hoped I would follow the river for the rest of my days, and perhaps die at the wheel when my mission was over. But the great American Civil War came along and changed my life forever. My occupation was over, and a new epithet was about to be applied to me, that of a murderer. Ladies and gentlemen, the right word can be effective, but no word is ever effective as a rightly timed pause. I will therefore allow an intermission. It is also your first chance to escape. But I will be obliged if you would stay with me. I thank you.